into pipes that feed back into a single outlet at the very tail of the airplane, as far from the engines as you could possibly get, or any other source of ignition, and then just vents out into the very back of the plane. So they were taking, lessons, from what happened, even then, and that's how this happens a lot of the time. Is that those circumstances line up, that cause a tragedy, but reveal, a miscalculation, or a flaw, or a misperception, and then they take corrective action. So.
And it's important to note too that this flight crew was, among the best in the world. Ed Music, as you said, had logged over around 1,000,000 miles, and that is at a time when most people hadn't even maybe seen an aircraft. So, he was this unsung hero of pioneering the aviation industry.
Yeah, the everyone in the Pacific Division were the elite of the elite, and Music was the top pilot of them all. But what's interesting is again, in John Hill's book, Pan Am at War, which actually gives the entire history of the airline, starting from even before its formation. But he relates a story where Music's first officer was a man by the name of Cecil Sellers, and he as well was incredibly experienced. He had been a pilot in the First World War, and had ended up flying with a Pan Am subsidiary in China, the China National Airways Corporation, or CNAC. And there was another pilot there that he flew with, a man by the name of Just, who was a German national. And apparently one day they pulled out their logbooks and compared notes about their service in the Great War. And Sellers had been a bomber pilot, and Just had flown with von Richthofen's Flying Circus, had flown fighter planes. And they found an incident where Sellers had been pursued by a German fighter and nearly shot down, and discovered that it was Just who was the one who had been chasing him and only gave up when his machine guns jammed. And he said, that at the time he was very upset, but that now he realized that it had worked out for the best. That he didn't kill the man who became his friend. So all of these guys, were the best at what they did, and had their own, very varied and accomplished careers. Some of them long careers, like Sellers and like Music, and then others, just starting out, but very promising talents in their own right.
And that comes back to this whole notion that this was a really tight-knit crew as well, not just, aboard the Samoan Clipper, but across Pan America. And this loss was really, really felt across multiple platforms and people, and, perhaps the whole industry. And so it is part of this mission to do them service in finding this aircraft and sort of helping to understand maybe what happened.
Yeah, the radiograms from that time really kind of bring that to life, and you can sense the humanity and the emotion, behind it all. And there was a message that went out to all stations, where the phrasing is, "It is with inexpressible regret that we confirm the loss of NC-34 and its entire crew." And it goes on to name them all, and then the very next day, there's another message that goes out, and where it's instructions to everyone on how to observe company-wide, a moment of silence for for their lost crewmates, and it is explicit in stating that no one in the general public is to know, that this is strictly for them and those who were privileged to serve with them, and to express, their sense of loss, and to themselves, and to their industry as a whole. And so yeah, it was quite a blow. And there are photos, there's photos and articles in the San Francisco Examiner of the memorial service that was held at the steps of City Hall, and was very well attended, and where so many people turned out to pay their respects. And San Francisco was a company town. That was the headquarters for Pan Am and for the Pacific Division, and also in New Zealand. In some ways, Ed Musick and the crew of Samoan Clipper are better remembered in New Zealand than they are in the United States. And they're remembered for the service that they did in connecting, the Dominion, connecting that island to the rest of the world. And they were the first, commercial plane to land in New Zealand, and inaugurated airmail there a day before Imperial Airways reached there. So it was, they actually renamed a spit of land as Musick Point, and built a radio station there that is still known as Musick Point Radio, and contains a number of tributes to Ed Musick and the crew of Samoan Clipper.
And it really is, this global impact. And we have viewers from all over the world joining us right now. And among them, some students from Uruguay, South America, who want to know a little bit more about how our ROV systems work. So maybe we can throw it over to the team over there, and can you let us know how we sort of interact with these ROVs, how they send up this feed up to the boat and then out to the world?
Sorry, what was the question?
You guys are so busy over there. I should give you a heads up. How does the ROV system work? I mean, what are we working with in terms of communicating with it and operating it from 3,000 meters away?
Right now, with just Argus connected, we have a 6/8. We call it a 6/8. That's the main umbilical, 0.68 of an inch in diameter. That connects Argus to the ship. It's a steel-jacketed cable with 3 electrical conductors and 3 fiber optics, running down the center of it. The electrical conductors take high voltage 3-phase power down to power all the electronics, all the thrusters, all the controls on Argus. And the fibers carry all the communications, all the video, all the information-y stuff up and down. So sensor data comes up, control signals go down, and all the video we see and the viewers at home see comes up on that fiber. Converts all the electrical signals into light, which goes up the fiber, and then it converted back into electrical signals up top. Similar to how internet works in a neighborhood.
And normally we do have a dual ROV system, so Argus operating with Hercules, but for this segment of the expedition we are operating with only Argus. And Dee Dee, do you maybe want to go into sort of what's unique about that, and what prompted the decision to do so?
There we go. Sorry, technical user error on the headset. Yes, so we are using a side-scan sonar system that has been mounted onto Argus, which is a tow sled that normally is just outfitted with cameras and thrusters, but for this project we have taken the transducers out of the standard towfish and mounted them to the frame of Argus. And this allows us to survey in much greater depths than is typically done with a towfish, and it also allows us the added bonus of having a camera on the seafloor. Typically, we would not be so lucky as to have any visual of the seafloor. We would only be relying on the acoustic image that is brought back, which is the waterfall that we call it, the yellow and orange that's in your monitors. So Argus is being towed along the seafloor at a height of about 20 meters off the bottom, which provides for this survey the optimal image. And we are just starting a brand new line. The ship is lined up and Argus is doing follow the leader and is catching up and straightening out. And our signal will improve at that point, and we're ready to start a new line and gather additional data.
And at last count, I believe we had 13 potential targets. Is that still the most recent number?
That is correct. We did not see any additional targets on the turn. Unfortunately, you lose the quality of your data that you're gathering just due to the movement of the ship and the movement of Argus and bringing that up and down. So we did not see any additional targets, but we hope to on this new line, so we're always optimistic.
And for, once the data kind of straightens out here, and for our viewers at home, what indicates a target? I mean, what exactly are we looking for? What defines what may be a human created object versus a biological object?
Very good question. So side scan sonar is used for a variety of disciplines, not only for archaeology that we're doing here, but also geology, for habitat mapping, especially for fish species. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is the seafloor. It's showing the geology, the rocks, the different, we passed by during our turn sort of a pretty steep slope that was rocky. So I think that was the most interesting topography we'd seen so far. These are round shapes, typically, sort of consistent, nothing out of the ordinary. But a man-made object will have distinctive straight edges, right corners, and also the signal that comes back from being bounced off of metal per se just shows up different. It looks different. So we are looking for anything, man-made in origin, and like the wing of the Samoan clipper, which reports have it that the flying boat might have sunk with that wing intact, which would be a large target. So those are the features that we're looking for on the seafloor.
And I want to open up this next question to the entire control van. Again, we have a group of students from Uruguay who are just so excited about joining us in this expedition, and they want to know, what are some of the most surprising or strange finds that in your Nautilus experience you've seen?
I guess I'll probably recycle an answer several times because it still ranks very high in the list of things I've seen, and that would be the octopus brooding grounds on Davidson Seamount. It appeared that they were sort of sitting in these fissures that had some warmer water flow coming out of them that they were using to brood their eggs in. That was very unexpected, and I think is still in the process of being explored and further discovered for science.
I'm going to change my answer from last time I said that. Last time I said the gulper eel was the most surprising. But a little while ago, we were, what was this, a month, 2 months ago? We were on the coast of California at about only 70 meters deep or so. And we were cruising along the bottom, and a seal or sea lion, I can't even remember now, came swimming down in a real hurry and was in the camera like a flash and gone again right away, like using our lights for hunting, I guess, fishing. And it's just like in the camera view and gone. Whoa, what was that? And then it came back down a couple more times throughout the dive, but it was really because it was so quick, it was really surprising to see that.
I'll also change my answer, just for variety. On the last trip, when we were in the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, we saw some really cool stuff, and probably some new species, and also some expanded geographic ranges for others. And on one of our dives, we were about 1,000 meters, at about 1,000 meters depth, and saw a shark in Hercules camera. And we were trying to quickly figure out what type of shark it was, and we were kind of ruling out some of the ones that it really looked like because the reported depth ranges were so much shallower. But then we got confirmation from one of our scientists ashore that it was indeed a sand tiger shark, and looked to be substantially deeper than ever reported before, so by hundreds of meters. So very surprising.
And a lot of those, too, I mean, a quick Google search will help you find them, but highlight reels from the Nautilus, you can check all of those out as well. It's all online, 2019. And we do have, you know, people tuning in from all over the world. Just a quick recap of our map here that's lighting up. We have viewers from the US, the UK, Canada, Germany, Netherlands, our students in Uruguay, hello, Turkey, Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Australia. So thanks for joining us. We're searching for the Samoan Clipper. It was an Sarkoski 42B type flying boat that was downed in January of 1938. So we're currently scanning an area of 2 square miles, or just over 4 square kilometers, using our side scan sonar to map and look for any sort of anomalies in the ocean floor that might be indicative of human-created objects, which are defined by hard lines or right angles, things that maybe you don't see in nature. Argus is down there all by himself right now, picking up those points, and our data team is logging them as we find them. And Hercules will go back down as to do more in-depth analysis of those potential targets. So at last count, we have 13 potentials, and we're just very excited to be here.
Can I talk about my most unusual Nautilus find?
Oh my gosh, of course.
Well, for me, it has to be that we found a plane wreck inside a shipwreck. I was lucky enough to be on board in August of 2016 as, not surprisingly, the historic aviation specialist for the first investigation of the sunken aircraft carrier USS Independence, which was a World War II era light carrier that was purposely sunk off the coast of California in 1951. But Nautilus did the first dive to confirm the wreck and investigate it, and we were using Argus and Hercules, and Allison, I believe you were piloting Argus that day,
Yeah.
and we we actually took Hercules. Well, sort of we wouldn't really call it inside. It dropped down to get a good look at the through the elevator shaft, and just enough to give us a view of an airplane that had actually fallen down inside of the hangar deck elevator. The initial sonar pass by the Boeing Echo Ranger had revealed some kind of object down in there that we suspected could be an airplane, and we were able to just enough room to safely drop Hercules down to get a look, and revealed. First thing we saw as we came down, there was a wing that was detached and resting upright against the far forward bulkhead, and you could see the national insignia, the stars and bars, very clearly. This white symbol on a blue background, and then camera tilted down and revealed the cockpit and nose of what turned out to be a Grumman F6F5N night fighter, Hellcat night fighter. So for me, well, the airplane and ship guy, that was that was a little double treat for me. So
Yeah, that was an incredible dive.
And we have another repeat question, so we're getting well versed in what people really want to know about the PSYOPs team up here. Someone in the UK asked if you could pick a wreck to search for, what would it be?
well, is that question for me, or is that for everybody in the?
Yeah, for everybody, but if you want to start, have at it.
Well, I mean, I'll probably just give the same answer that I did yesterday, which is, like the guys on the team in the playoffs. We just want to concentrate on this game. So before we talk about the rest of the season. So really just we want to find Simone Clipper, and then not that haven't thought of some other ideas, but Simone Clipper is really the the priority and the dream right now.
I think I'm obligated to say Simone Clipper. But yes, it is high on the list right now, especially right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that kind of is a great segue into why the Simone Clipper is such an amazing thing to be looking for right now. And, it has all of these elements of mystery and loss and human interest, as well as these scientific components of using the technology and the archaeological analysis and information. So it really is sort of this collaborative search for something that had a huge play in aviation history.
Well, yeah, and it's a story that isn't really widely known, and it should be. And so I love the opportunity that this gives us to shed light on it and to bring it into the consciousness again, and reacquaint people with Ed Musick and with the Simone Clipper and with that whole era of the great flying boats and the pioneering aviation, and also the opportunity that gives us, through what is possible with Ocean Exploration Trust, with what they've created here, and the ability to share the experience, with the world, that people who aren't fortunate enough to be able to be here on the scene in the ship are still participating in the exploration process and still have a sense of what's involved. That right now, we're living the story right now. In the future, maybe you look back, or in other great finds throughout history, it all seems to take on an inevitability. Like, oh, well, of course they did this, and they did this, and this, and that led to that, and it seems like it's all a straight line, and it's not. And it's there's a lot of decisions that have to be made along the way, and a lot of people brought together and to contribute, their insight and their expertise and their knowledge and passion. And work together to try and get that result. So right now, we, all of us, are exploring. We are looking for answers that are unknown, and we're going to try, and we are making our best decisions and doing our best and bringing to bear the best technology and the best people to try and uncover those answers and share them with the world. So I'm really proud of the fact that we can do that with this expedition, that people get that opportunity to be a part of the exploration process, and that right now it's all there's a certain degree of like uncertainty and even like anxiety. Is it there? Are we doing everything we can? But but that is what heightens the thrill of discovery, if it comes, is that you've earned it, and this group will have earned it if we can finally find that last write that last chapter. So.
And taking all of that too, the S-42B in itself, just as an aircraft, was a pretty unique plane. And like you mentioned, there were only 10 that were made. And can you sort of discuss what the difference between a flying boat and other types of planes were, just in terms of maybe differences in uses and how they were constructed?
Well, yeah, I mean, a flying boat is really what the name implies. I mean, it is a boat that flies. I mean, the airplane is constructed with a hull that has a a boat shaped underside, and like so the S-42B or Simone Clipper was a pure flying boat where there was no landing gear on board at all. It simply landed on a hull-shaped fuselage with and on the wings there were kind of these outrigger pontoons at the end of the wings to keep it steady, in the water. But it would float on the water, and then it could be moored, either tied up to a mooring or to a dock, or if in some cases they could anchor. There was an anchor in the bow of Simone Clipper in a windlass, and there was a flight down to South America where the weather closed in, and Music made the decision to land early I believe on a river, but and anchored up and waited, and he had a crew, like a whole passenger list of VIPs, and including the head of the company, Juan Tripp, but they all respected that his judgment came before all others. He was the master of the vessel, and made the decision that it was safer to land, and they just continued on in safety the next day. I mean, but yeah, so they would also, if they needed to, you could attach wheels, while the plane was still floating in the water, and pull it up onto land, tow it up, a seaplane ramp, and to service it on land. And so there's, we can probably at some point, post some of those photos as well of showing that. And there's some film footage that I know we've seen too of that process of the crew in their bathing suits, like getting in there, not the crew of the plane, but the ground crew in their bathing suits, getting in and either removing or attaching the wheels to bring the plane, either roll it on and off of the shore. So in the the advantage in the early days of flying, when the system of airfields had not been as established as it is today, and that really only come out of necessity in World War II, when airfields popped up everywhere for training, for logistics purposes, and longer strips, and ones that could accommodate large bombers and heavy transport aircraft, and that really built up the infrastructure that makes up what we think of as international air travel today. But in those days, most of the facilities existed in port cities to service merchant seagoing vessels. So you could piggyback on that with your with the flying boat operation, and so that was most desirable for them, and also that essentially a flying boat, as long as it's over water anyway, has its potential airfield anywhere it goes.
And the Simone Clipper specifically had been sort of retrofitted, right, to make this bigger journey.
For long range survey, yes. So they had with the B model. So they had built 7 of the aircraft prior to that, and then with Samoan Clipper, or as it was then known, just NC16734, or I guess it was construction number 4207 to be really specific. Yeah, it was specially modified. They increased the wingspan by about 4 feet to give it added lift, and because they knew it was going to be carrying added weight, because they were going to increase the fuel capacity to extend the range, which they did by converting the what was known as compartment D, which was directly beneath the wing, and adding these 6 additional auxiliary fuel tanks, with each with a 225-gallon capacity, and that gave it extended range. And then they also had a larger navigator's setup, and stripped out a lot of the other accommodations, like passenger accommodation stuff. Though they did have some bunks and seating areas for the crew, and they were off duty. And then the tail compartment was for mail and cargo storage. But yeah, so that was the plan with the B model, was in order to do that, to open these new longer routes, like the one to New Zealand that was specifically the mission for Samoan Clipper.
And this journey, the final journey, was actually a mail route, right? I mean, so they were carrying about 750 pounds of cargo, and no passengers. It was just a crew flight.
Yes. So they were inaugurating the mail service to New Zealand, and the contract called for mail deliveries to begin by the end of the year, and the end of the year being 1937. So they had started that process in December. So they'd begun it. So they were in honoring the contract that way, and had gone down and picked up the mail and brought it back, and now they were on their way, returning with mail from the United States. And yes, carrying, according to the Bureau of Air Commerce report, they left Pongo Pongo with 751 pounds of cargo and 2,300 gallons of gas to make a 1,800-mile flight to Auckland, New Zealand from Pongo Pongo. And with a crew of 7, the commanding officer, first officer, junior officer, flight engineer, assistant engineer, navigator, and radio operator.
And for those viewers who are maybe just joining us or missed our earlier rundown, would you mind sort of just discussing the timeline of that morning? What happened, from the time that they took off until
sure.
the time they were lost?
So the Clipper departed for Auckland right around 5:30 in the morning. In fact, the log of the U.S. Navy seaplane tender and USS Avocet actually notes the departure of the what they call the PAA, Pan American Airways Clipper, and took off from that stretch of water where we were tied up yesterday, and headed out through the harbor entrance and turned south for Auckland. And then 1 hour and 19 minutes into the flight, they radio back, there's an oil leak in the number 4 engine, and they're shutting it down. And Music has decided to turn around and return to Pongo Pongo, because he doesn't want to continue on an 1,800-mile journey with only 3 out of his 4 engines functioning. So they turned back, and about an hour or so later, the plane is sighted over Apia, in what was then the New Zealand Trust Territory of Western Samoa, now just known as Samoa, the independent nation of Samoa. But it is supposed that Music was doing that, taking advantage of the fact that he was airborne and had this this extra time, and was would be close to land. So so he felt it was justified to go overfly Apia and see if perhaps study it as a potential alternate landing ground, and then departed, headed east to American Samoa, in distance of only about 75 miles. So half an hour's flight or so for the Clipper, and then they radioed about 8:27. Pan American Radio logged a call saying that they were proceeding to dump fuel and would then shut down the radio in order to not risk a chance of a stray spark during that operation that might ignite the fuel vapors during that process. And then the plane never comes back on the air. There's loss of communication, basically as of 8:35 or so in the morning, and they know there's trouble. But there's still hope. At that point, they think, well, maybe he's had to land, and the Clipper is still, floating there, and the mountains are blocking the radio signal, and so we have to get out there and find him. And Music had been forced down before, and turned up, safe and sound. So, and there was a bit of confusion that was caused by the fact that the plane had been seen over Apia prior to the accident, and then that tended to be conflated sometimes into that the plane had been sighted safely near Apia. So the San Francisco Examiner headlines for that day are, Clipper down in South Seas, rumored sighted near Samoa, and a wife awaits word, and hope. It's all very, very hopeful. They know there's a problem, and are still hoping for a positive resolution. But then the next reports that reach Pongo Pongo are that people on the northern side of Tutuila have sighted smoke to the northwest. And that same Navy ship that was there as the station ship at Pongo Pongo, the Avocet, was equipped with what I believe was a Grumman J2F Duck seaplane, float plane, and it was went up and flew to the north, and Lieutenant Williamson, the pilot, spotted an oil slick and debris floating on the surface of the water. This was just within a few hours of losing communication. So they had determined that the plane had very likely had gone down within just a few hours of the accident, and so they wanted to be sure, of course. So the Avocet got underway. They were getting up steam, during the afternoon, and sailed that evening about just after 7, and had to go. The Pongo Pongo is actually only about 14 miles as the crow flies from the accident site, but the harbor entrance faces south, so you have to go out and then around to the west and up north, and that's actually what we did yesterday morning. We retraced that exact route, and came around to the north, and Avocet had to loiter offshore for several hours. The logbooks describe maneuvers where they lined up on the lighthouse at Tapu Tapu, and then, which is the westernmost point on Tutuila, and then headed due north, And then after about an hour, they turned around and steered due south, just loafing along at 4.9 knots, just loitering, waiting for the sun to come up. So the logs, according to the logs, 0550, commenced search for Samoan clipper. Sunrise in this part of the world on that day would be 6:04, and at 06:06, the log notes they have sighted the oil slick. And then 31 minutes later, they spot debris in the water and launch the ship's boat and start picking up what is definitively wreckage associated with Samoan clipper.
Thanks for that, Russ. This is Ed now playing the role of the video engineer.
Right.
Would the pilot in those aircraft probably weren't participating in or hearing any of the radio transmissions, eh? There's a separate position in the aircraft?
On the Sikorsky?
Yeah.
Yes. So there was a dedicated radio officer, and in those days, despite what the movies will tell you, most radio communication would have been by telegraphy. So you actually had a guy sending Morse code,
Right.
sending and receiving Morse code, and you had a dedicated radio operator just for that purpose. So and it it tends to, like I say, music reported, but it's he instructed his radio
Right,
operator
right.
to send that message. So.
We've just crossed over another interesting a rock formation off to the left side. You can see on the cameras as well as the side scan waterfall, a pretty high rise of rocks.
Yeah, this is giving us a real, we're learning new information all the time. I mean, when we first started researching this, I remember that the white paper form that was distributed by Ocean Exploration Trust, asked for characteristics of the target area, and the only information we had available to us was the soundings from 1938 that said it was 1,000 fathoms. And that's all. That's the entire scope of what we knew. So we had no idea. Is it just a flat bottom? Is it ravines and canyons? We're near a volcanic island, so a lot of supposition, but no real information. And our first glimpse came in April of 2017. The NOAA ship Okeanos Explorer, thank you, was in the region and was able to pass over this area and get us bathymetry from their hull-mounted multi-beam. So it gave us the lay of the land. We didn't, obviously from that great, height above the ocean floor, you don't get the fine resolution that would pick out, an airplane or airplane debris. You could run over a fleet of aircraft carriers and not see them. But what it did tell us was it gave us the depth, which turned out to be 2,800 to 3,500 meters. So half again to twice as deep as was supposed in the 1930s. But also gave us kind of the general broad outlines of the terrain, and where some areas are flat, and then there's I think to our east there's a pretty substantial rise, and but now
Thank you.
Now that we're down here with this equipment, we're really getting a sense of the actual physical terrain of and characteristics of the bottom. So a mixture. We've got some flat areas, some sandy bottoms, and I'm sure we have the people qualified in the marine sciences that can, and geology and so forth, that can tell us more about the kind of terrain and characteristics that we're viewing now.
When was the Okeanos mapping leg?
That was done in April of 2017.
Sounds right, yeah.
Yep.
I wonder if they ran sub-bottom. It looks like it's got a pretty solid bottom with just a little bit of sediment on top.
Right. That is a good question, and I'm sure there's somebody on this ship
Yeah.
that knows the answer.
Yeah, I don't believe I've seen that. You know.
The sub-bottom profile?
Yeah, yeah. I don't believe they had the instrumentation to do that. Or were running it, I should
Right.
say.
Yeah, that's more likely.
That's usually been the case in the other places we've been before Samoa, but I don't know about this.
It's really interesting, too, to sort of think, you know, in the 1930s, the aviation industry was sort of at the forefront of, you know, it wasn't accessible to a lot of people, and it was sort of this exploration, and here we are sort of doing the same thing, right? Exploring what's been little explored before.
Yeah, I like that notion of modern explorers following in the wake of earlier pioneers, and obviously in different venues, but still being brought together. And though Simone Clipper and Music as well, like they were part of trying to bring aviation out of that time and that era of the daredevil and the stunt flyer, and make it make it reliable and routine, even that the general public has more use for just the ability to buy a ticket and know that on a particular date at a particular time you can travel from one point to another, and you can do it quickly and in safety, and they were a part of that, despite the fact that yes, what ultimately befell them, but the work that they had done up to that point, and even in their loss, contributed to advancing that
shrimp,
that goal.
Yeah, one of the, like I said, we're looking at sort of the clippings from the 1930s, and a San Francisco Examiner article described Music as one of the most cautious. So, he's leading this industry, but he's also, his reputation is one of sort of caution and responsibility, and, ensuring this new notion that it is safe to travel by air.
Yeah. Sorry.
How old was he in 1938?
Let's see. He would have been 40. Hold on. He was 43. He had not yet. He was going to turn 44, but was 43.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting. There's stories from early in his career when he was working as a mechanic, and just trying to earn money and get the chance to fly himself. But they nicknamed him the jeweler, because he would polish every piece, and he was so meticulous in the way that he cared for the airplanes, in his charge, and soon pilots realized that the planes that were in Music's hands were the ones that didn't have engine failures and didn't have forced landings, and so they all wanted to have the jeweler work on their plane.
And so for those of you that are maybe just joining us, we are doing a side scan sonar mapping of the bottom of the ocean. Argus is down there by itself, and our data crew is logging any sort of points of interest that look to be human made. So those are defined as straight edges or right angles, things that maybe don't occur in the natural environment. And then once we finish mapping out this 2 square mile area, a little over 5 kilometers squared, Hercules will go down and we can do a more in-depth analysis of those targeted points. Dee Dee, do we have any updates on, our lawnmower pattern here?
Yes, we have just started our third line. We're about maybe half an hour into it, and looks like we have 2 hours to go to complete this line. We are still working on our lucky number 13 for a number of targets, but I'm sure that number will increase, so stay tuned.
Once again, that's my lucky number.
Maybe it's target 13 then, that's it.
Yeah.
On line 13.
Okay, and we're on line 13.
Oh, yeah. It's got to happen.
My dad's birthday's the 13th.
my birthday is next month on the 13th.
Hey, there you go.
So it's all lining up.
We have a question for maybe our ROV team. How does Argus maintain its altitude on the bottom? Is it by cable and winch, or does it have thrusters?
Sure, I'll take that. So Argus, we use a combination of a cable so we can raise and lower the system, and then we also have a forward thruster and an aft thruster to control our heading. So we have control over up and down and also the direction we're facing.
And then why are we using Argus for this side scan sonar as opposed to maybe Hercules or both?
The side scan is an Argus thing. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is speed. We can go faster through the water with just Argus versus Argus and Hercules. And the other one is with this system, it is much more suited to be installed on Argus based on its size and the way it's used. It's more designed to be dragged through the water from a tow sled configuration than it is to be mounted to a neutrally buoyant self-driving, or not self-driving, but any direction driving vehicle.
Yeah, as I understand it, the thruster noise can also interfere with the sonar signal?
Yeah, noise from pretty much anything can interfere with it. Argus thrusters also interfere with it, but less so than, say, our Herc thrusters. But any loud things that happen to be similar to the frequencies that the sonar is measuring at can interfere with it.
And Hercules is dependent on Argus, so we can't do a Hercules-only dive.
And when we're looking at this this mapping, how do we tell the size of an object just from the data?
So if you look at the yellow and orange waterfall screen that's up right now, there are marks up at the top. The high frequency sonar is up at the top and the low frequency is down below, and there is a range that is set. And up at the top you'll see 10, 20, 30, 40. Those are actually the distance out from the Argus. So that's how we can determine the size of something, is by looking at what the range is and what those little marks are to show a distance. And we can also, once we have a target that we've saved, go back and do specific measurements on that target.
And it certainly takes a trained eye to be able to differentiate between what might be a potential target and maybe what is more a biological feature like a rock or something else. How do you tell what the difference is?
That's a good question. And many targets that you mark end up being a big, large rock. So you don't always get it right, but it's better to mark the targets and go back and look at them. What we're looking for in this survey is anything that might be man-made sitting on the seafloor. This could be a straight line, it could be a right angle, it could be the reflection that comes back from that target. The reflection that comes back from metal, as would be on the Samoan Clipper, has a different view to it, a different reflectivity that comes back that is different than the geology that we're going over right now. So it's sort of practice makes perfect, and you know, if in doubt, mark it, and there's no harm, no foul to go back and at least check the box and rule it out.
Yeah, I did a dive once from our imaging what was clearly a shipwreck, and you could see the bow and the stern and the ribs of the vessel within, back and forth, and a really large mass in the center that was probably a boiler or a stack of some sort. And we got the ROVs down there, and it was a roll of cable that had come off a vessel. And it had just laid out on the bottom to just tease us immensely. And
yeah, we could find a shipping container. Those
Yep.
That's a good example of something that you just come across that are falling off cargo ships all the time.
And we've talked a little bit too, each engine on the Samoan Clipper weighed about 1/2 ton. So when we're looking for these potential targets, you know, what are we estimating they might be? The wing or the body of the aircraft, or, you know, an engine?
So the largest feature that, based upon the accounts of the sinking of the Samoan Clipper, is the large 118-foot-long wing structure that housed the 4 engines that sat up top. Reports say that they saw this intact on the water surface before the explosion that ultimately sank the plane. So that, I think, is what we're going on for the largest item, but there could be smaller pieces related to the body of the plane, as well as the other flaps and such associated with it.
And the way in which the aircraft would have sank depends on, you know, its state of intactness at impact. Was that sort of like a safe assumption, would you say?
Yeah, we don't exactly know the extent of the explosion that sank the plane. So based upon, you know, not knowing that, we could have larger, more intact, you know, remains sitting there, or it could be more scattered. So that's why it's important to try to add to the historical record by finding the archaeological remains. We're really, you know, telling the story and reconstructing the pieces, just like a puzzle or a detective, to tell the story.
And if we do find the aircraft, you know, what sort of clues are we looking at specifically with its structure, or with, you know, the way that it's lying? What sort of features might help us fill in those gaps in the story?
So I definitely think if we do have an intact wing and engines, that you know, corroborates the story of the eyewitnesses, and I think that would be a pretty amazing story to say. We'll also be able to look for if there's any charring or burning that could be a result of the explosion or fire. The level of that and what remains have that on there, I think, are pretty telling to the level of the events that went on, as well as the distribution of possibly debris from inside the cabin structure, and really just the size of the wreck site is something that can say how dramatic was this event that ultimately caused the plane to sink.
And Argus is hovering around 3,000 meters, maybe a little bit more. What sort of, you know, environmental factors could play into how well the Samoan Clipper is preserved? You know, there's not a lot of wave action necessarily down there. There's no light that reaches the seafloor at this depth. You know, is there potential to discover a relatively intact aircraft?
Yeah, I think we're in pretty good conditions to find a well-preserved structure on the seafloor. We're looking at deep water. I'm not sure if we have a temperature. It'd be interesting what the temperature on the bottom is. I'm not sure Argus has.
I'm betting 2 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
Well, 3,200 meters, maybe 4.
So temperature definitely factors into preservation levels. The colder, the better. It prevents some of the little microorganisms from eating materials. So deep is good, colder is good, and because of the deep water, there's potentially lesser sedimentation rates, obviously no disturbance from wave action. So we have all the planets have aligned within the deep water for an excellent preservation potential.
And Russ, you spoke earlier about other vessels or aircrafts that have been recovered at similar depths, and you know, you described seeing even the detail of the name written outside of the aircraft. And, can you talk about sort of what it's like to find something that is so intact and resembling of the day that it went down?
Well, yeah, there's been a number of recent discoveries. I don't know really that there's been any aircraft recoveries, especially